In this video, I'm going to discuss photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process where sun energy is captured to energize electrons, and then basically what happens is the plant will store the energy in the form of sugar. The basic photosynthesis reaction is this. You've got 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water, and sunlight is used to convert those to sugar and oxygen, and it makes 6 oxygen. So what are the basic structures that are involved in this? Well, if you were to look at a leaf, you'd see that leaves have several layers. And the middle one, where photosynthesis occurs, is called the mesophyll. Carbon dioxide comes in through stomata on the underside of the leaf. And the reason that these are located there is that this avoids water loss in the leaf. To open and close those stoma, we have cells called guard cells, and basically what they do is they allow that carbon dioxide to come in, but they keep the plant from releasing too much water. This is especially important if you're a plant that lives in a much more dry environment. As we go further into those plant cells, there are organelles called chloroplasts, and these are really like the home of photosynthesis. Within the chloroplast, you'll have a stack of structures, and these are called thylakoids. In those thylakoids, there is chlorophyll. This is like the most important part of photosynthesis. This is where the pigment that absorbs the light exists. Now, these light converting steps in photosynthesis happen in what are called photosystems. And these are protein complexes. In a way, you can almost think of them kind of like what happens during the electron transport chain. And here in these photosystems, this is where light is going to excite electrons through these light harvesting complexes. There are 2 types of photosystems present in cells. These photosystems differ in terms of what they reduce. So where do they deliver the energized electrons, and what is oxidized? So what is the source of the low energy electrons that turn into high energy electrons during the process of photosynthesis? Photosystem 1 gets its electrons from the electron transport chain and then uses light to charge those low energy electrons. Photosystem 2 takes water and splits it, and it gets those electrons from the water. Oxygen is a byproduct of this splitting, and once those electrons are released, it also uses light to charge those electrons and get them to a higher energy state. So let's look at this a little bit closer. If we were looking at a thylakoid, what we would see is several of these photosystems embedded in its membrane. Here we have photosystem 2 and photosystem 1 embedded in the same membrane. If we zoom in on one of those photosystems, you'll see these green dots. These are the antenna proteins, and that's where the chlorophyll is. Basically, what happens is the chlorophyll creates a reaction when sunlight hits it, and that reaction creates energy. That energy is going to be used to excite electrons once we harvest enough from enough antenna proteins. So how did those electrons get excited in the first place? Well, we start with 2 low energy electrons in photosystem 2. Light excites those electrons, and when they're in their excited state, now they're able to move down an electron transport chain. Basically, we're going through a series of oxidation and reduction reactions where those electrons are moving to different proteins in the sequence. Every time they move, they lose a little bit of energy. So we move those high energy electrons to our next protein, and then we move them one more time. This protein here is a hydrogen pump, and basically now we're using the energy from those electrons to power that hydrogen pump. This is moving hydrogens into the cell. After that process, the electrons go on their merry way to their lowest energy state. But then what happens to the hydrogens? Well, those hydrogens can be used to power ATP synthase and make ATP. So where did the electrons come from in the first place? Well, when water is broken, it will release hydrogens and oxygen and electrons. Those are the electrons that are excited by light in photosystem 2. At this point, it would seem like it's over, but it's not. We have another photosystem. Photosystem 1 picks up the low energy electrons that come off of that series of reactions from photosystem 2, and light is used along with the chloroform within that photosystem to energize those electrons. Again, they pass down through a series of proteins, and their oxidation and reduction reactions are used to reduce NADP to NADPH. This moves it into its high energy state. So now we have another energetic molecule. During the Kelvin cycle, our goal is to take that energy that we created and put it in a storable form. To do that, what plants do is they make glucose. The first step of making glucose is that the plant is going to bind 3 CO2s to a 5-carbon molecule called RuBP, and using something called Rubisco, that is going to be turned into 6 molecules of a 3-carbon sugar. Once that happens, we reduce each of those 3-carbon sugars using an ATP. So you spend 6 ATP to reduce those 3-carbon sugars. After that, we use our NADPH and break that into NADP plus H, and we do that for each of those sugars to create 6 molecules of G3P. We'll then combine that G3P with another G3P. So we'll combine 2 of them to make a glucose, and we'll use ATP to turn the rest of it back into Rubisco. So taking it back to that original molecule that we used. So what have we done? We took 3 carbon dioxides and we used a bunch of energy to combine those carbon dioxides with varying things, eventually creating a glucose molecule. And as you saw in our cell respiration, glucose molecules contain a lot of energy-rich bonds and can be broken into energy as they are needed. Glucose doesn't just have to be used by plants for energy. They can also use it to make other substances such as cellulose and starch. And we already saw how cellulose creates those tough cell walls that help the plant to stay alive. The starches are important too, as they can provide fuel for the plants during times where there's not sunlight, for example, during the winter.